histories of the course at XIMB, which I kind of took over. I've been teaching this course for 3 years. So there's been a collaborative history in the way the course was developed, and I think Shankar Datta has played an important role in the livelihood school coming and taking sessions, sometimes full course, sometimes half course, and so on. And for some reason or the other, this tradition has more or less continued at XIMB. So that's one part of the story of the course of XIMB and the livelihood school in some way. Just a few days back, and I'm teaching a course on public policies, and it was almost like an aha point for me. And in a conversation with the students, I think we need to understand that we are dealing with a totally different kind of expectations of the youth who come to our colleges today. And I'll just give you an example. So we were starting off with some conversation in the course, and then it ended up with asking questions about the finance minister, and I just extended it further. This is a rural management program, and you'll be meeting some of the students later. And I had asked them, who's India's rural development minister? And you heard Zulfi tell that in the last 8 months there were 3 changes. It shocked me to know that not a single student actually knew who the rural development minister was. So I said, okay, maybe there were 3 changes, so they didn't know the rural development minister. So I asked them, who's the agriculture minister? And actually they had no idea who the agriculture minister was. Now the point is, I don't want to blame the students completely, but I think we need to understand that we are dealing with a perspective and time where all kinds of discussions are there in the news, but no mention whatsoever about these key ministries that lead to our understanding. There are also other challenges we have to recognize, that we are no more recipients of the IRMA. The IRMA course the IRMA test has been banned, which at some level used to be a filter. So now every of our admission criteria of the management schools is completely based on the CAT. If they don't get anywhere, they end up in a rural management school. So this is a certain kind of change that we need to recognize and work with. We can't take this out of the equation. Of course, the other point is that, of course, after this, they checked in their mobiles and they found the answer. That's not a big deal. But I think the point essentially is that one has to see this course, and I'll come back to the fact that this course that I'm talking about, there's a rural production systems course in the first term, the rural livelihood system course comes in the second term, is just 1.5 credit out of a total of 105, and we are actually in a process of increasing our number of credits, and we might go up to 120 in an ongoing curriculum review. But I'm sad to report that we continue to remain 1.5 out of 120. In fact, sometimes I'm worried that a completely tool-based course, a standalone course like PRA, important tool, is also having 1.5 credits. So we have this kind of dynamics with regard to the way the course structure is. But at one level, I think the students are aware about NRLM and the newer opportunities. They've been hearing about it. And I think it's, for all of us in terms of pedagogy, just talking about the Day 5D framework makes no more sense. We have to engage with what's happening with NRLM and revise our curriculum accordingly. So we've had to add elements to it. We have had to also ask a question. Suddenly, midway during the course, we understand that the students don't know what an SHG is because they're just still fresh. Then we have to start. Again, we use Chaitanya's e-learning course for that. Our students are engaged in different ways to understand the ecosystem. One of the things has been the Sita Rama Rao case study competition, which Access Development Services coordinates, and we've had our students winning prizes there, including Joseph, who's sitting next to me here. So there's been certain independent engagement outside of the course, and I think it's important to recognize these as part of the students' learning ecosystem. We've been working with SRLMs, and I think this has provided interesting opportunities for us. We've had instances. We started off by trying to send students to the Odisha Livelihood Mission. Some of the students went. Of course, it was not a completely satisfactory experience, but it was an interesting start. And then we've enhanced this with, when we send our students for rural immersions, and Ram of Samanvaya sitting there, he's facilitated quite often the interaction with the Tamil Nadu mission. We've sent students to Jivika as well. So there are newer kinds of possibilities that this has opened up and they learn along other kinds of ways. So there's some learning that happens in the course, there's much more learning that happens outside. So let's look at both together. Summer internships again is an interesting opportunity for us that also happened through the Rural Livelihood Internship Scheme. But also I think these opportunities that students have in terms of talks, special talks, they learned a lot when Shankar Datta and Rama had come and shared, when they were launching the 4th edition of the resource book. I dragged them along to the new university and got them to introduce livelihoods there. And conferences, our students have just come back from the 7th National Conference on Social Entrepreneurship, which Professor Shukla has been conducting, and every year several students go there. When we have a workshop here, students participate. So I think these kinds of spaces, are part of the these kinds of spaces are part of the ecosystem, and students innovate in interesting ways. And I use this example when they had their competition called Sparda, which is a B-plan competition, a unique competition. It's not the regular B-plan West. The teams are called here, they're taken to a village, made to understand the situation there, and then come out with a B-plan. And without any of our prodding, our students had actually worked out with the Odisha Livelihood Mission. So they were taken to Odisha Livelihood Mission's place, and then the students had to work out a B-plan based on it. We take no credit for this, but this is all part of the learning ecosystem of the students. So the course still needs to be seen as a very small window to larger ecosystems. But the question is, what are the drivers and how to enhance the interconnection between the three wheels? So RLS is a tiny dot out of the rural management program at XIMB, which is again a very small part of the larger ecosystem. Which is driving which? We will be making the mistake if you think our course is driving the bigger wheel. It is probably more the other way, and we have to see how the course can relate to the larger ecosystem. So we have 10 sessions. I think we've been using cases from the 3rd edition quite regularly, but I'd just like to mention one opportunistic based innovation that we started off, which was the livelihoods mapping exercise. And that's also partly because of the fact that the course was happening just before the students going on their field immersion. And once we had this opportunity of getting Mr. Swami from the Livelihood Mission, not from the ILRT or the Livelihood School, who came and introduced this, we said, let's make this as a compulsory component where every student going for their rural immersions will actually do a livelihood mapping which will be diverse, and then we'll use this as part of the learning. So just a couple of days back, I did a quick survey from the students on what is it that they learned from this experience. And so essentially this is an opportunity for us, and this question of how do you link field with theory, I think this is a grand opportunity that we accidentally recognized in XIMB. Now if the course gets shifts to the first term, we'll lose this opportunity, but that's another problem. So 67 of the students responded to this online response questionnaire that I had just 2 days back. It's very simple questions, but just to get a sense of what is it that they have learned from the livelihood mapping exercise. And I think simple things like the fact that what does it mean for a livelihood to be seasonal? What does it mean for, this multiple activities? What is a main livelihood? What is a secondary livelihood? How do we plan for it? The fact that the whole family is involved. All the standard kinds of things that we take actually gets tremendously reinforced during that field visit. What are the difficulties, risks? And the fact that they can understand the village in a nutshell through this mapping exercise. It's not whether they have identified a livelihood well at the end of it or not. They are able to measure incomes, they are understanding a village, recognizing the potential of the community, etc., etc. So we asked another question, what more would they like to know or perhaps they've missed? And these are some very early answers. I think we have to recognize they're still first years. So someone said, we want to know how do you design a livelihoods? What's the structure for the reasons for this? Some uniform set saying, 10 sessions is just not enough. In fact, my constraint is that we finish this exercise, we don't even have a chance to sit back and make sense of what they've drawn from the field. I just do some grading and give it back to them, and we move on to the next course. But I think it's possible if we had more time to understand what they picked up from the field. They said they would like to know more about cost-benefit analysis, value chain analysis, plans and policies of NGOs on livelihoods, whether we can have a simulation game for understanding concepts, less framework, more practice. Can we see a negative case discussed where some intervention has actually caused a lot of failure and possibly damage in the community, or didn't work well because of whatever kind of reason? And of course, this question which Professor Vaswani referred to is how do you select an appropriate livelihood? Whether there is an appropriate is a different matter, but how do you go through this process is something that they were asking about. So I'll end with just placing a few questions. I don't think I have the answers, but we could discuss around these. I think one of the challenges we have is that there's little to follow up on the introductory course that we have. And I think how do you connect livelihoods with other elements which in some sense Professor Pramod Singh was talking about, with say questions on public policy, poverty, microfinance, entrepreneurship, managing ecosystems, etc. So can this be seen as a continuity rather than as standalone kinds of offerings that are there? And sometimes my worry is at XIMB we end up having a certain kind of standalone system. So there's no clear pathway that you start with this, move on here and move on further on. So there's little building of knowledge, which should come first, which should come next. If we only have a core course, and unfortunately again, despite the Manthan project, we've not been able to increase. We said we'll at least have one additional elective on livelihoods, which will be a 3-credit course. We should have a core course, and then we should have an elective which can draw much more on this. We have not been able to do that. So what should be the core? How do you introduce a livelihood specialization? We've done a rebranding. We've called it development social entrepreneurship. We might be calling it now as livelihood and development management. But to be honest and within the audience, I can say it's just a renaming of the things. We've not really changed anything substantially in terms of what we call as livelihoods in the structuring. And I think what we now have this opportunity which we can make much more sense of. In this process of understanding livelihoods, collecting this material, we were able to draw upon an advanced course which I think Pradhan runs at KESLA. The whole training material is there. So of course it's meant for professionals who are much more aware, self-aware, have worked in the field. But I'm sure certain elements of that can be taken in for those students who are interested in pursuing a more serious engagement on livelihoods. And how do we do this is a question. How do we actually learn from other kinds of courses, maybe in other places, and so on. So this is something I'd like to, and finally, how do we as academics and practitioners sit together and evolve better pedagogy? How do we say perhaps cut or revise the framework? Should we be spending so much time on the DFID or the RLS 9 mandala framework? And how do we perhaps add the NRLM context and the opportunities to help students and SRLM staff to make, within quotes, make them more livelihoods or practitioners ready? So I'd leave this no answers but some questions.
Thank you.